Hello, friends of Studio Burley. This is Steve Burley, and it is coffee time. Time where I go across some of the stuff that's come across my desk since the last coffee break. And today the topic is called Your Government is Lying to You. Is anybody surprised? I don't think anybody will truly or can legitimately say otherwise. That is pretty much the source of power of governments today, lies. So in any ways, I want to welcome you to the show. We've got Michael Keller. Welcome, Michael, and Wisdom Trek in the comments already. I'm going to jump right into the program, and first with a bunch of stuff that's generally related to what's going on right now in the world before we get to the ultimate topic. The final topic is an article of pretty much that same title, Your Government is Lying to You, and then it has a subtitle to it, and that's coming up at the very end of the show. It's a fairly long article, but we're going to go through some of it in detail. So here from unheard.com, How Anarchists Captured Portland. Now this is written by Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein was the fellow you'll remember from Evergreen University or Evergreen College, who was mobbed by a team or a group of lefties on campus, wokesters, in the early days of wokesterism, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And Brett Weinstein is a left wing. He still calls himself a lefty. In any case, let's read what he has to say. Some of his articles has some good points to say, and others parts of his article reveals a little bit about what Brett Weinstein really hasn't changed his view of the world very much, and doesn't seem to see that leftism is what got us to this point. He kind of beats around the bush on that, but we'll see right now. Left-wing rioters are burning the city to the ground while the police do nothing. Yeah, that in itself is a big question as to why is that? Why are the police doing nothing? Well, they're being told to do nothing, obviously. Let's read on from Brett Weinstein. On the face of it, Petunia's Bakery in Portland epitomizes everything progressive about the city. Its pies and pastries are wheat-free, look pretty on Instagram, and more importantly, taste delicious. Wheat-free. That's part of the whole gluten fear that I forget the name of the disease that's related to gluten, but it became a Hollywood celeb cause, and now woke bakeries around the world are advertising that they don't use gluten or wheat in their materials and their products. And in fact, wheat is a very healthy product all on its own. You don't have to pull the gluten out of it unless you have a serious celiac disease is the name of the disease. Yeah, there, Tom Forsyth pointed that out right here, celiac disease. And if you have celiac disease, you won't be wondering if you have celiac disease. You'll be really quite miserable until you get diagnosed. This is not one of those things, oh, I don't feel so well because I ate a little bit of wheat. No, celiac disease is extremely uncomfortable, and you need medical treatment, and it's serious. You just can't touch gluten of any kind. But it's one of those health things that Hollywood celebs started saying, oh, I went gluten-free and I feel so wonderful. Yeah, right. Let's read on from Brett Weinstein. But take a moment to read the sign on the shop's window as you enter, and it soon becomes clear that Petunia's has been drawn into a far darker chapter of the Portland story, one that tells of a city in free fall due to an almost accidental anarchist takeover. Almost. That's his get out of jail free card. It is a anarchist takeover, not accidental, where residents have as much to fear staying home as going out, and even the most harmless of shops is liable to have its windows smashed in. Let's read on what Brett has to say here. This is the lefty point of view. Brett Weinstein is still a lefty, and he in a way is defending leftism, even as leftism beats the crap out of everybody he knows in leftist cities. Even beats the crap out of other lefties for not being lefty enough. Let's read from the top. We are a small, woman and locally owned business. Petunia's sign pleads. Pleading is exactly what it is. You're pleading to bullies, and those bullies are in the same group you're in, the lefty group. Quote, we are struggling like so many of us in this hard time and love our community. Please don't cause us any damage. Welcome to Portland, the progressive dream that has turned into a nightmare. The progressive dream is a utopian dream. It always has been a utopian dream. And the problem with utopia is that it doesn't exist. It is always a dystopia, and here it is, for the umpteenth time in human history, seeking lefty utopianism is leading to yet another totalitarian, destructive, bullying tyranny. And yet, he's couching his words here. I'm going to be critical of Brett here, even though at times he shows signs of opening his eyes, he just can't quite open them. This is not the progressive dream that turned into a nightmare. The progressive dream has always been a nightmare. It's just that you never had the power that you had today to put your dream into play, and your dream is now into play, revealing itself to be a full-on, full-out nightmare. But he doesn't want to quite go there yet. Let's read on. But its attempt to reason with the anarchists by highlighting how it is a struggling small business, locally owned and run entirely by women, as if that's supposed to be so much better. You can't, apparently, even if the women are chopping up babies, because it's women-run business, you're supposed to give it a pass? Come on. Why is it that you're appealing to? Well, because it's leftism. They've always appealed to women are better than men. Let's read on from Brett's point of view here. Speaks volumes, okay? Its attempt to reason with the anarchists by highlighting how it is a struggling small business. What small business isn't struggling, especially today? All small businesses are struggling. And why should leftists in a small business be given a pass by other leftists because they're leftists? Well, locally owned and run entirely by women. Speaks volumes about day-to-day life in my home city where negotiating with vandals has become an essential skill. That is the progressive dream. It has always been a nightmare. And Brett Weinstein really needs to wake up to this. Progressivism has always been an attempt to create a utopia. This kind of utopian where everybody's needs are always met in some equal measure, and there is some way to measure all this equality, and that nobody's going to suffer under this by giving absolute power to those who mete out the rewards and privileges and goods in their utopian society. It always leads to totalitarianism. Always a tyrant rises. Always vicious, the most brutal, vicious groups take control. And that's what's happening in Portland. Reading from the top. Rioting has occurred like clockwork, and often anarchist direct actions are announced in advance so the police are never taken by surprise. And yet the city's officers, under the command of our cartoonishly liberal mayor, who is also our police commissioner, have stood by and night after night allowed the city to descend into chaos. That is progressivism right there. You just have to name it, and then we can deal with it. Well, then we can start dealing with it. Last September, rioters even targeted the mayor's own apartment building, breaking in and setting fire in the lobby. I remember that. The mayor's response? To announce that he was moving out of the building to keep his neighbors safe, a move any competent parent would recognize invites more terror. That's right. He's being conciliatory to the bullies, to the terrorists, and these are terrorists. They're out there burning down people's property, and the police are ordered to stand by and do nothing. That is your progressive dream that he referred to in the very beginning. This is what the progressive dream really leads to. And it's leading to this same consequence in every one of the leftist cities in the United States today. Real people people who build for their own lives and try to contribute to society are leaving those cities because they're not livable. Because the progressive dream, the progressive utopia, is in fact, always has been, a complete and utter dystopia. Face it. You're not going to solve any of these problems until you can look the truth in the eye. And Brett Weinstein, that means you looking in the mirror and saying, I was wrong. There's no such thing as a good progressive dream. It is a dystopia. It is leading to pain and misery and destruction. That's all it will ever lead to. Look in the mirror, look in your own eye, and say to yourself, Brett Weinstein, I was wrong. You're continuing to support your previous position because it was very good to you, working in a leftist university, being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to preach feel-good utopian leftism to other feel-good utopian leftists who were just waiting for an opportunity to chop up an enemy and burn him at a stake. But it's time for you to open your eyes all the way up and say, yes, our progressive dream was just like Mao's progressive dream and just like Stalin's progressive dream. All progressive dreams are the same in that respect. Let's read on. The anarchists have gained a strange kind of control over the city in their fight against Nazis and white supremacists. I have to laugh at that. I have to laugh at that because they're not fighting against Nazis and white supremacists. Those are boogeymen. Those Nazis and white supremacists don't exist in any significant numbers in the United States. They are some small pockets. They are in retreat. They are mostly in hiding. They collect in some who knows where, and maybe have a few conversations, but they have no power. They're not a rising threat. This is a boogeyman used to justify the real terror of these anarchists, these so-called progressives with their leftist utopian nightmare that's coming to play, that's coming into reality today in front of our very eyes. They appear to have conjured in a quest to give their anger meaning. Yes, okay, well, I didn't read far enough. They appear to conjure. Yeah, they conjured them up. That's exactly right. They conjured up a fake enemy in order to justify their own evils. Let's read on as what Brett Weinstein has to say. He was right on that particular point, conjured them up. America may be being torn apart by the tension between Democrats and Republicans, but that is not what afflicts Portland. In a way, it is. The problem in Portland and in so many cities along the West Coast is that the progressives have fully defeated conservatives, and without any opposing political force, liberalism has become unhinged. Here he goes off, he becomes unhinged in his thinking here. Liberalism has not become unhinged, it's always been unhinged, it's just been let loose out of its cage. And we're seeing the result of unrestrained leftism. It hasn't become unhinged. It has always been unhinged. Reading from the top. But all that all changed last summer when, during Black Lives Matter protests, the city anarchists discovered that so long as they shouted certain slogans, citizens who once grudgingly tolerated them would now cheer them on with gusto. Suddenly, the absurd claim that all cops are bastards became a mainstream belief, and abolish the police went from being a threat to a policy proposal. Yes, there's truth to that, although Black Lives Matter is also a Marxist leftist group. It is not a black group. Black Lives Matter has never been about black men. In fact, they were very antagonistic about the very black men they used to fundraise, and claiming that the family doesn't include black men, doesn't include men at all. It's a feminist version of the family. It includes the supremacy of females. And it is a Marxist. One of the founders of Black Lives Matter even called herself a trained Marxist and is now buying multi-million dollar homes across the country in largely white neighborhoods. And they have not helped a single black family, to my knowledge, with all the billions of dollars they've collected. It's hypocrisy. Leftism, progressivism, has always been a nightmare. It is always, this dream is always taken over by the most vicious, brutal, sadistic people that rise to the top of these movements. It is a utopia, and the utopia is always a dystopia. Let's read on. Of course, all reasonable people understand that black people have faced oppression in North America since their ancestors were brutally imported as slaves. Well, all people should understand that people in power all around the world have always brutally treated the people who work, the workforce, the slaves. That has happened everywhere in the world. This is not an exception to it. It is just another example of it. And that was ended. That no longer exists today. Its dead corpse is only kept alive to benefit those who are trying to profit with this new leftism. There's no systemic slavery left, or systemic racism even left in North America. That, and again, is another conjured up evil enemy that does not exist except that it serves the purpose of those proposing it. Let's read on. Liberals can be justly proud of our role in fighting this evil. Isn't that interesting? From abolition to the civil rights movement and beyond. How wrong? The civil rights movement may have included quite a significant push from the liberals of that day, but they aren't similar to the liberals of today, that's for sure. And the abolition, well, that was the Republican Party that abolished slavery in the U.S. It was not a progressive, it was not a leftist, and it was certainly not liberals. Let's read on. And this has put those of us who consider ourselves of the left. There we go. Bret Weinstein still considers himself of the left, despite all of the overwhelming evidence that leftism is what's causing all of these problems. In a dangerous predicament. I am not a gun enthusiast. Okay, read on. I never wanted to own guns, but I do. For the same reason I would if I lived in a war zone. The civil authority has abandoned the law-abiding citizens of Portland, and in so doing, it has created a new Wild West in which we are each responsible for protecting ourselves from bands of roving bandits. And yet, he doesn't say that he opposes gun control. In fact, he implies that, saying he's not a gun enthusiast, that he still, in spite of all this, kind of supports gun control. There's something amiss in the mind of someone who's seeing all this evidence that his own ideological position is causing all of the problems that he complains about, including problems in his own life, and yet can't budge his ideological position out of his mind. I think the word I'm looking for is there's an ideological, or rather he's a premature ideological commitment. And that premature ideological commitment of Bret Weinstein, I think that probably started in childhood, because he most likely come from a family of ideologues, leftist ideologues, who have been drilling this into his brain since before he could think. So this idea, the idea of a premature cognitive commitment, is a psychological term, and I can't remember the exact definition, but the words kind of give it away, the meaning away. It means that they've made a commitment to a certain reality before having evidence there's evidence for that commitment. And Bret Weinstein seems to be one of those leftists that will never be able to budge leftism out of his brain, out of his mind. No matter how much destruction, pain, misery it causes, he will still find a way to say it's not the right leftism. They didn't do socialism right this time again. They will never get to the point of saying that leftism is the problem. Reading onward. Sometimes their threat is purely symbolic, as when they topple public monuments. In these situations, the city responds by helpfully removing the offending statute. Think of the implications in that statement. Again, helpfully removing the offending statute. In other words, conciliatory to the bullies again. Anytime all they do is back down and let the bullies win every step of the way. This is what they call, Brett Weinstein calls, helpfully. Without thinking it through, without discussing it through or the reasons behind any of their behaviors, he just rationalizes it that it must be right, so it's helpful to remove the offensive statutes. Does he ever question whether everybody in the town agrees that those statutes are offensive? Oh, sorry for the brief break. No, the question never even arises in his mind because he is of that mindset, the premature ideological commitment to this utopian state of leftism by helpfully removing the offending statute. They even were offended in some parts of the U.S. at Abraham Lincoln, the very man who was responsible for succeeding with abolitionism. No, there's something mentally wrong. As Janice Fumengo did a Fumengo file on a victim mentality disorder, and I think she touched on some of these topics in that particular episode. Might be worth revisiting that. And onward we read here from Brett Weinstein. So long as rioters claim to fight for the oppressed, they appear to have carte blanche. If they decide they don't like this article, if they come to my house to menace my family as they have done to Andy Ngo, Mayor Wheeler, and countless anonymous citizens of Portland, will the police intercede? I honestly don't know. Yes, you do know. They will not intercede. Only on specific extreme cases. No, they are conciliatory. They are backing away and letting the mob burn you down. That is the progressivism that you don't want to admit that you sign up for. You support that progressivism by not fighting it, by not putting this progressive leftist utopian idea behind you. You are contributing to it, and you are now reaping what you sow. I don't want to see you go down that road, Brett Weinstein. I'd like to see you come out and admit and start acting against, start analyzing those premature cognitive commitments that you have obviously made. Start looking at them deeply and ask yourself, are they really realistic? Is this kind of, we can all hold hands together and everybody will get equity and everybody will be equal to one another and no bully will rise to the top of that system and brutally kill, oppress, destroy other people? Look deeply into those assumptions that you have made and you'll find that you are deeply wrong. They will. Progressive leftist utopianism always leads to massive human misery. Let's read on. And it's happening before us in our eyes today. The truth is, I rarely see any evidence of even basic law enforcement here in Portland. The police are extremely slow to respond to emergency calls. The citizens and businesses have, over the last year, been left to fend for themselves against criminals thinly cloaked in progressive slogans. Those are progressives, thinly cloaked in progressive slogans. They're not thinly cloaked. They deeply, deeply hold those progressive slogans to that is their deep ideology. That is their ideological commitment. And the reason you won't want to call it out is because you, in fact, hold those things still to be truth, to be valid. You still believe that you can bring about progressive leftist utopia in the world. This, even given the evidence that this is what it leads to. And given the way the mayor and city council, skip on a bit here, and this is the great tragedy of Portland. As people flee New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles, Portland has everything it needs to pick up the slack and be the next booming metropolis. Everything that is, except the political will to resist following those once great cities into a self-inflicted depressive spiral. What is the unifying theme between all those progressive cities? Well, it's the progressive ideology that they all cling to, that they build their culture around, and they are all falling to the same fate. This is not a little exception to your progressive utopian goals. This is where every one of those utopian progressive goals or utopias leads to. And it's going to keep leading to those things until you finally wake up and admit that your ideological commitment to utopian progressive leftism is fundamentally wrong. It does not fit with human nature. Every single time, the most brutal, sneaky, conniving, manipulative, con artist with evil intent and power hungry rises to the top, and everybody else suffers. Everybody else. If there was a broad spirit in humanity of compassion and goodwill, if that was fundamentally the truth of human nature, without any of the backstabbing, greed, and faults and failures that we all have within us, it might have a chance. But that would be a Walt Disney World. Life is not like that. Evolution is not like that. There is nothing on our planet that has ever been like that. Utopianism, progressive leftist utopianism, always leads to a dystopian nightmare. Reading from the top. Portland ultimately is a great city headed in the wrong direction. As Heather and I watched it fall to pieces, we can't help but feel we have seen this happen before. But why can't you learn from the first time? This is the second time. This is the time for you to learn your lesson. Portland's meltdown is, after all, eerily similar to the collapse of Evergreen. A city's hapless mayor hamstringing the police at the behest of a woke mob that claims to see racists around every corner. It's uncannily similar to what we saw in 2017 and what you're seeing in every progressive leftist city today. The blindness involved in writing this article. I'm going to first say the article has very good points to make, and you should read the article if you're interested in more details. But there is a blindness that permeates throughout it. The complete and utter unwillingness to introspect about your own ideological commitments that you're seeing unfold in these riots around the U.S. today. You're unwilling to see that this is where it comes from. Your ideological, leftist, purist worldview. It's going to always lead to this. The result will be the same, albeit at much greater scale with much higher stakes. Once again, we are left with the question, can anything be done? And once again, I fear that the answer is no. Well, there's the defeatism. He would rather, what Brett Weinstein is saying here is that he would rather cling to his warm and fluffy feeling of ideological unity with the left in their pursuit of their utopian future. He would rather cling to that and watch the cities burn to the ground, the people being terrorized by criminals. He would rather that happen than actually get to the root that it is his group's ideological commitment to this false utopia that is causing the problem in the first place. He says, nothing can be done. Yes, Brett, something can be done. Look inside yourself and admit that you are so incredibly, fundamentally, and profoundly wrong in your ideological commitment to progressivism. That's where things start to get done. Let's move forward. The College Fix. This is a quickie. They published an article. I'll read the title here. Students claim soap dispensers are proof of systemic racism. Here's my rebuttal. Now, this is again progressive leftism, that they can find systemic racism in everything. If you spill your coffee rushing to class, and it lands on a progressive toe, they will call that systemic racism. They will say the coffee was deliberately made too hot so that it would burn your toe. And then you deliberately spilt it. And this is an important point, because you can rationalize anything. A person with sufficient creativity in their mind can rationalize absolutely any conclusion they want, especially after they are willing to forego holding themselves to be congruent with facts that they see around them. Let's read on here. This is printed April 21st, just a couple days ago. Why systemic racism is akin to a conspiracy theory. This is the rebuttal to the article, but let's read a bit of this. What comes to mind when you hear the term systemic racism? Perhaps Jim Crow era laws or banks' redlining policies? Well, I've got a new one you can add to the list. Soap dispensers. This is the kind of lack of intelligence that has befallen the student population at most of these progressive universities. Let's read this. But it's not just any dispensers, mind you, it's those high-tech automatic ones. The reason is simple. As one UCLA, and I'm not surprised it's UCLA, student claimed during the debate, automatic soap dispensers don't see her hands, quote unquote. You can see where that's going. Due to the dark pigment of her skin. Our whole culture is supposed to be blind to the troubles of people with darker skin. Nothing could be further from the truth. As another student reiterated, soap dispensers are racist because they force, quote, black and brown bodies to show their palms, the only light areas of the skin, in order to get soap out. Well, that's actually wrong. You can actually show the back of your hand and it will still dispense soap. He goes on to destroy those actual arguments, not that it should be even necessary to waste your time destroying such stupid arguments. And then he gets back to the point, but I digress. The point here isn't how a soap dispenser works. It's the idea that students at UCLA actually thought that they were designed with white supremacy in mind. The students actually thought, or at least they claim to think that. Now, there's no way for us to get inside their mind and say, are they just lying and virtue signaling or jockeying for position in their level of sensitivity to the races, the people who are subject to systemic racism, or are they just trying to be a Me Too victim style? I too am a victim because soap dispensers are not to my liking. It could be any of those things. But let's just let's believe what they say, that they actually believe these words here, that soap dispensers were designed with white supremacy in mind. This is the mentality on U.S. campuses today. That is disturbing. Read onwards. These students go about their daily lives, and when anything... I got some pop-up going on here. I don't know how to turn that off. Oh, there it goes. That when anything goes even slightly wrong, they immediately conclude that white supremacy, systemic racism, or racism is to blame. Absolutely everything. This is the nature of a conspiracy theory. This is a real conspiracy theory. Those of us who are criticizing the government's actions, the real power that's going on in front of our very eyes today, are called conspiracy theorists. But these people who are creating out of thin air bizarre arguments that soap dispensers are an indication that they were designed with white supremacy in mind, they are not being called conspiracy theorists, when they are, in fact, a conspiracy theory, which this article does argue for. And I recommend you read it. It's a short article. It goes on. He does a good job of making a few other incidental points as well. Reading from the top. For them, racism is not a viewpoint held by shrinking group of misguided individuals, but rather a secret force that exists everywhere. A secret force that exists everywhere, permeates all things, and yields power over society. Sounds familiar? That's because it has a name, conspiracy theory. This is really a conspiracy theory. This whole systemic racism thing is one gigantic conspiracy theory. The obvious objection is that systemic racism isn't a conspiracy because it doesn't fit the definition. Well, actually, we went over this in one of the coffee sessions before. The term conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA in order to cast suspicion upon anyone who prints any article that weakens the narrative presented by the CIA through the mainstream media. This was crafted in the late 1960s, the term was, and it became wildly successful. It is an integral part of our entire Western culture now, this idea of conspiracy theories. And they use it whenever they want to deflect blame away. It's very, very shorthand and fast way to deflect suspicion from the things that those in power are doing, like they are with this coronavirus today. Let's read on. But followers of systemic racism blame it on everything. It's like it's an omnipresent boogeyman. They do that. They use it to explain any outcome they dislike, facts and data aside. Its believers cite their, quote, lived experience as proof enough. I hear it on campus all the time. This is a student who wrote this rebuttal to that article in the College Fix website. In order to stop the advance of these ideologies stemming from the toxic and abusive orthodoxy of critical race theory, systemic racism and its proponents must be pushed out of the center of American discourse. The first step is labeling it for what it is, a conspiracy theory. I wholeheartedly agree. This is a great article, you should read it. But I don't think they're going to have that easy a time of it. Critical race theory is extremely useful to the megalomaniac power brokers that are in the world today, that have taken control of the world, that are running our governments, that are running the mega corporations of the world. They're using it to their advantage. They will not let it go away just by calling it a conspiracy theory. They will turn that table on you, and they will call you a conspiracy theorist and blind to all the millions and thousands and millions of different ways that our system is rigged to be racist, systemic racism. It's a game, and they're winning at it. The problem itself is leftism, but even deeper than that, the problem is that we are in a period of time where the super powerful, the ultra powerful of the world, see an opportunity to grasp power over the entire world, to eliminate the middle class, and recreate what they've always enjoyed throughout all of human history, one small elite ruling class and a world full of slaves serving them. This is what they're after today. Now, the College Fix had another article out. A black student columnist asks, when should we leave America? This is on April 20th. This is a good question. They hate America so much. With all its privileges and advantages that it gives you, they ask the question legitimately, when should we leave America? Well, let's have a look at what he says. Jeremy Lott, April 20th. So, he comes right out of the gate and says, I have no loyalty to this country, but I have loyalty to those who fought and died for my right to even write this down. They couldn't have known where I would end up, but they were willing to face the worst horrors of this country to ensure I could be more free than they were. He's implying that these were the civil rights, black civil rights people of maybe the 1960s or throughout, but he does imply that it's people like him, and he's a black person questioning whether he should stay in North America. And he's giving full credit to other black people in history only who did this for him. So, right off the bat, he's very selective on who he credits for his present high quality of life. Reading on. He closed out the column, and this is the College Fix is an article critical of this particular article that was printed on some other campus, and I can't remember the thing for it, but the link is in the description. Have a look at it. He closed out his column by stating, this country is still not a home for black people. It may be hard to find a home anywhere on this planet. But if it does exist, it's not the United States of America. A country which has now that had recently a black president, that now has a woman who alternatively calls her black and East Indian or Asian, as a vice president. I have met, I spent a lot of time in the U.S. when I had an apartment in New York City for a while when I was married, and I met a lot of very successful black people, some immigrants, some born there, all of whom worked hard. My circle of acquaintances and friends and associates were all hardworking people because that's the kind of people I tend to hang around. And they were very successful. And yes, they do feel the United States is their home. They're proud of their home. They support the United States. These people here, they're wokey-dokey. They're progressive leftists. They are chronically unsatisfied. They cannot be satisfied. They are profiting off presenting themselves as victims. They are illegitimate. They're not intellectuals. They've taken over the university campuses throughout the West, throughout Canada and the US, with their victim ideologies. What we need to do is kick them all out. We need to reset the education system in the West, all the education system. So that's all I have to say about those things. Now we're going to get more to the meat of the potatoes here, is how our governments are lying to us. And these are not just any old small lies. These are lies with a purpose, and the purpose is not good for us. This is also something we've seen repeatedly throughout history. You put enormous power into hands of people in government, give them power over you, and they do not end up with your best interests at mind, at heart. Let's read on here. So we'll start out with some coronavirus updates. The United States, this is April 22nd, adds 116 countries to its do not travel advisory list. This coronavirus, which has some 99-point-something% survival rate, a huge percentage of the population which feels no symptoms to it, and they're locking down the entire world on the basis of this. Even in my lifetime, we've seen far worse illnesses threaten the world, the whole world. The Ebola virus was a big, terrifying one. It didn't spread nearly as bad as we thought it was, but we didn't shut down the world for it either. And we had bird flu and swine flu, and we had mad cow disease. All of these are viruses. And we did them all without shutting the whole down the whole world for it. We had terrorism. We didn't even shut down the entire world for the 9/11 event. Why this one? Why the coronavirus? Well, the reason why is they were able to use the media to make people sufficiently terrified by lying to you. But let's carry on. What is it? Why are they doing it is another question here. We're going to get to that. The United States Department has added at least 116 countries this week to its level 4 do not travel advisory list, putting UK, Canada, France, Israel, Mexico, Germany, and others on the list, citing very high level of COVID-19. Well, I want to ask this too, okay, and this is a legitimate question, I think. If the United States has the same very high level of COVID-19, how is it more dangerous to go to France or Canada that has the very same level that you do? Shouldn't you be saying, oh, well, it's no more dangerous than the US? Really? The US rates of COVID-19 aren't any better than these 116 other countries. All these countries are in the same boat. So what's the point of stopping one person from going to one country to another if every one of the countries is the same? The point is to take away your liberties and freedoms and get you used to not having freedoms and liberties until they get you injected with the vaccine. And the point of the vaccine is not the vaccine. The point of the vaccine is the vaccine passport. The entire point of raising this fear to the max and getting you to be so fearful that you rush to take an untested vaccine with genetic material in it, the point of it is not, they don't care that much, in my opinion, about the vaccine. They care that they have your vaccine passport, and now they can control your entry and exit to everything, everywhere, including your ability to get money. ability to travel, your ability to purchase anything. And then you have to keep your vaccine passport up to date. And if you don't keep your vaccine passport up to date, what happens? Your freedom to do absolutely anything, basically your freedom, your right to live, is taken away from you. This is the direction it's going in. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go on ahead here a bit, because we're coming to some more details on that. Reading from the top. On Monday, the State Department said it would boost the number of countries receiving its highest advisory rating to about 80% of the countries worldwide. What is the point of restricting travel to a country due to COVID-19 when their risk of COVID-19 is the same as your risk and the same of all the other countries' risks? We all have the same risk level. I don't believe the risk is very high, but it doesn't matter. Let's just say the restriction of travel is because those countries have high levels of COVID-19 infection. But here everybody else does too. Let's read on. Before Tuesday, the State Department listed 34 out of about 200 countries as do not travel. The State Department now lists 150 at level 4. It declined to say when it would complete the updates. Let's read the last part of this, because this is pretty important. The State Department said on Monday the move did not imply a reassessment of current health situations in some countries. They didn't reassess anything, but rather reflects an adjustment in the State Department's travel advisory system to rely more on the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention existing epidemiological assessments. CDC. The CDC was one of the organizations flip-flopping all over the place at the beginning of this, changing their directions and minds and their recommendations repeatedly. The CDC is the organization that ordered the hospitals around the world, around the U.S., to list every death that you weren't sure of as a COVID-19 death. This is why motorcycle accidents in Florida were being listed as a COVID-19 death. The CDC is not a trustable organization, unfortunately. A year and a half ago, I would have said, yeah, I trust what the CDC says. But they have revealed their hand. They have tipped their hand. They are part of the fear-mongering. They are part of those, they are contributing to the general hysteria. And the U.S. State Department is using the CDC's information now to shut down travel to other countries which are no more dangerous for the citizens than the U.S. itself is. And these people are saying to you, trust the science. This is not about science. This is not about the disease. This is not about anything other than control of you and me. Let's read on. And here's another example. There have been several treatments for this COVID-19 that have come up, not to mention even preventative measures you can take, like certain vitamins, vitamin A and D and E and C, for instance, and the hydroxyquinone has been suggested to be on a once-a-week basis to help you prevent getting it, and then ivermectin was another one. They're not even promoting these things at all. And here come out in The Economist, budesonide, a cheap asthma drug, can alleviate COVID-19 at home. And yet they're insisting you have a COVID-19 vaccine. Like I've said just a minute ago, the COVID-19 vaccine is not about the vaccine, it's about the vaccine passport, which then can be used to track and shut down everything in your life anytime the officials want to do that. This is massive control. This is a massive destruction of your freedoms that is going on today. And they're just getting you acclimated to it. Let's read from the top here. As vaccination against COVID-19 gathers speed, the end of the COVID-19 pandemic is starting to hover on the horizon. But not everyone will take the vaccine, and none of the jabs is 100% effective at preventing any illness at all. Interesting in itself. Even where vaccination rates are high, some people will at some point become infected. Results from a clinical trial in Britain published today show that budesonide, a cheap generic drug they can take at home, will make their illness slightly less miserable. And I think, I don't know if I quoted this here, but it shortens your infective time, how long it takes you to get over it, by 3 days, which is significant, very significant. So you're over it 3 days earlier, which implies that you're also not going to get it as serious a progressive of the disease, which then maybe means it saves your life too. Maybe even better than the vaccine does. But will they really study it that deeply or promote it? Not if it's going to stop them from being successful with implementing the passport, the vaccine passport. These health passports have been in production, in research and development for decades. The wealthy of the world see a massively powerful tool in completely controlling the lives of everyone in the world with these vaccine passports. Reading onwards. Now this article is coming from LifeSite News, which I will admit has sometimes I don't agree with everything that they publish there. They go out on a bit of a limb for my taste at times. On some issues that are not central to my interests here, our interests at Studio Brûlé. But I want to go through this. This does push the envelope of ideas of what's going on, but it's hard to argue with the arguments presented in this article. I highly recommend, if you don't read any of the material, read at least this particular one. It's a longish article, and I've got quite a few clips to go over on it. So, LifeSite News, exclusive. Former Pfizer vice president says, "Your government is lying to you in a way that could lead to your death. Look out the window and think, why is my government lying to me about something so fundamental? Because I think the answer is they are going to kill you using this method. They're going to kill you and your family." Well, maybe, maybe not. Let's look at the ideas. And let's keep in mind that we have a lot of historical precedents in which abusive, totalitarian, tyrannical governments have killed massive numbers of their own citizens in their search for power. So I cannot dismiss this as a conspiracy theory simply because it sounds outrageous, because every one of the terrible, horrible events of history always sounded outrageous before they actually became real in front of your eyes, with people dying and being abused. Okay, let's read on. This is April 7th this came out. Reading from the top with me. Dr. Michael Yeadon, Pfizer's former vice president and chief scientist for allergy and respiratory, who spent 32 years in the industry leading new medicines research and retired from the pharmaceutical giant with, quote, the most senior research position in his field, spoke with LifeSite News in a telephone interview. He addressed the demonstrably false propaganda from governments in response to COVID-19, including the lie of dangerous variants. I believe that's a lie too. Everything that the people in power are doing is pointing in the same direction. Create as much hysterical fear as possible in the people they are ruling over. They are not governing you just right now. They're not serving you. They are ruling over you now. He addressed the demonstrative false propaganda from governments in response to COVID-19, including the lie of dangerous variants, the totalitarian potential for vaccine passports, and the strong possibility we are dealing with a conspiracy which could lead to something far beyond the carnage experienced in the wars and massacres of the 20th century. Let's read on. He makes, I think, 7 points here that summarize this fellow's point of view. 1, there is no possibility current variants of COVID-19 will escape immunity. It's just a lie. This is true. The current variants that they're discussing, they cannot escape your immunity if you're immune to the original one. And he goes through a pretty reasonable and concise explanation as to why that is true. I highly recommend you read that. It's pretty good. Number 2, yet governments around the world are repeating this lie, indicating that we are witnessing not just convergent opportunism, this is an important term, but a conspiracy. Meanwhile, media outlets and big tech platforms are committed to the same propaganda and the censorship of the truth. This is pretty suspicious that this is going on. Number 3, pharmaceutical companies have already begun to develop unneeded top-up booster vaccines for the, quote, variants. The companies are planning to manufacture billions of vials in addition to the current experimental COVID-19 vaccine campaign. Reading from the top, this is point 4 he makes. Regulatory agencies like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the European Medicine Agencies have announced that these top-up vaccines will be so similar to the prior injections which were approved for emergency use authorization, drug companies will not be required to perform any clinical safety studies. That's how similar they are. If the vaccines are so similar, why are they needed? Our immune systems are pretty generally highly functional. But here is the thing. They will not need to perform any clinical safety studies. And once you have your vaccine passport, it will be invalid unless you take the updates. Unless you take those incremental top-ups. You're entrapped. They'll give you a chance to time to do it, but then you'll have to take them. Thus, number 5, this virtually means that design and implementation of repeated and coerced mRNA vaccines, quote, go from the computer screen of a pharmaceutical company into the arms of hundreds of millions of people, injecting some superfluous genetic sequence for which there is absolutely no need or justification. This is genetic material they're injecting into you and requiring you to have a vaccine passport in order to do anything reasonable in the world. Read on. Why are they doing this? This is a really important question. Since no benign reason is apparent, the use of vaccine passports along with a banking reset could issue in a totalitarianism unlike the world has ever seen. Absolutely, you guys know I agree with this. I've been talking about this since the very beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic. Recalling the evil of Stalin, Mao, and Hitler, mass depopulation remains a logical outcome. Keep in mind that before Mao did his supreme evil, people who said Mao will do supreme evil would have been called conspiracy theorists. People who complained about Hitler, like Chamberlain, people who refused to see Hitler for what he was, like Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of the UK, were always arguing to be conciliatory to Hitler. He's not a bad guy. We have to appease him. We know what that led to the slaughter of millions upon millions of people. And the same with Stalin. Every single time that these massively evil regimes arise, before they display their full hand of evil, if you call it out and warn that the direction it's heading in, you will be called a conspiracy theorist. And we're warning of that right now. This progressive leftism is a tool that the elite are using. Only one of the tools. Number 7, the fact that this at least could be true means everyone must fight like crazy to make sure that system never forms. Yes, we should be rejecting these vaccine passports. We should be rejecting more than just the vaccine passports, but that is probably the most significant milestone that they're trying to put in place, because then they have the ultimate lever of power over your freedoms in the world, the vaccine passport. Let's read it from the top. This is later in the interview with the fellow. I'm going to expand this so you can read this better with me. Continuing, he said, "But in the last year I have realized that my government and its advisors are lying in the faces of the British people about everything to do with this coronavirus. Absolutely everything. It's a fallacy, this idea of asymptomatic transmission and that you don't have symptoms, but you are a source of a virus. Yeah, he's probably right. I kind of thought that might be possible, but I'm not an immunologist, so but I thought, okay, if logically it's a possibility. But yeah, I can see why they would want you to believe that there's asymptomatic transmission, because that means everybody feeling perfectly healthy also has to follow the extreme lockdown rules that they are putting in place. That lockdown work, that masks have a protective value, obviously, for you or someone else, and that variants are scary things, and we even need to close international borders in case some of these nasty foreign variants get in. All of this is lies. All of it. Or, by the way, on top of the current list of gene-based vaccines that we have miraculously made, there will be some top-up vaccines to cope with the immune escape variants. You should read this article, whether you believe he's a conspiracy theorist or whether you think he's partly right or completely wrong. You should check out the ideas presented in this article because they are quite well presented and they are important ideas, important questions to ask. Everything I have told you, he says, every single one of those things is demonstrably false, but our entire national policy is based on these all being broadly right, but they are all wrong. So why are they being promoted so strongly, like it's life or death situation? Reading from the top with me. Conspiracy and not just convergent opportunism. I think he explains convergent opportunism here. Convergent opportunism is basically when people from different interests independently come to support the same urgent or the same goals, the same measures for different reasons. So it's opportunism on each one of their part, and they converge and a kind of consensus way to go because that direction benefits each of them individually. In any case, let's read on. But what I would like to do is talk about immune escape, because I think that's probably going to be the end game for this whole event, which I think is probably a conspiracy. Last year, I thought it was what I called convergent opportunism. That is, a bunch of different stakeholder groups have managed to pounce on a world in chaos to push us in a particular direction. So it looked like it was kind of linked, but I was prepared to say it was just convergence. Again, convergence can happen without two people even talking about it, because it's like a third factor that appear to be linked, but they're only correlated. Anyways, I'm probably explaining that too much. Read on. I now think that's naive. There is no question in my mind that very significant power brokers around the world have either planned to take advantage of the next pandemic or created the pandemic. George Soros, I think it was, said that the world was ready to accept a one-world government. It just needed the right global emergency to get people to accept it. He said that in 2008. One of those two things is true because the reason it must be true is that dozens and dozens of governments are all saying the same lies and doing the same inefficacious things that demonstrably cost lives. So they either planned to take advantage of the next pandemic or they created the pandemic. In this case, I think, well, I don't know if it was created deliberately, but certainly when the opportunity came, they've been hysterically promoting the fear of it in massive ways, with a degree of effort that has never been seen any time in human history around the world for any issue of any kind. Never have we seen an entire world lockdown. Reading from the top. And they are talking the same sort of future script, which is, we don't want you to move around because of these pesky varmints. These, quote, variants, which I call samients, by the way, because they are pretty much the same. But they're all saying this, and they are all saying, don't worry, there will be top-up vaccines that will cope with the potential escapees. They are all saying this when it is obviously nonsense. Obviously nonsense. Why would they be doing it? Do people who don't believe this is going on, that there is an attack on your freedoms going on in the world, do they really think that people with this kind of wealth and power are not going to use their wealth and power to the maximum of their capabilities? That they're going to have in their heart your best interests in mind? Well, maybe if you're 5 or 6 years old, you believe that. But if you've come to be an adult and you believe that, there's something dramatically wrong with your education. Let's read on. For example, you might find that after a banking reset that you can only spend through using an app that actually feeds off this database. He's talking about the vaccine passport database. Your ID, your name, and your health status flag. That's coming. They're not hiding it. It's not a conspiracy to say that this is coming. The elite, the powerful, the governments of the world are saying it's coming. They're testing it, and they're taking real actions in front of our faces to make this happen. Let's read from the top. But nevertheless, we're going to tell you it's true. And then when we tell you that it's true and we say, but we've got the cure, here's a top-up vaccine, you'll get a message based on this one global, this one ID system. Bing, it will come up and say, Dr. Whedon, time for your top-up vaccine. This is straight out of a dystopian sci-fi movie. And, by the way, it will say your existing immune privileges remain valid for 4 weeks. But if you don't get your top-up vaccine in that time, you will unfortunately, detrimentally be an out person. And you don't want that, do you? So that's how it'll work. And people will just walk up and they'll get their top-up vaccine. They're just walking up and getting their untested genetic material injected into them today. And they're shaming their fellow neighbors. And they're shaming their fellow neighbors into wearing masks. And police are arresting and beating up people who are not wearing masks. It's happening right before our eyes. This is not sci-fi. This is the world we live in today. Read from the top. Government lies. Big Pharma moves forward. Medicine regulators get out of the way. They won't even require testing for these top-up vaccines. And possible mass depopulation. I was really, really skeptical about this goal of mass depopulation. But let's remember this. It's happened in the past. It's happened in the recent past. These eugenics type movements. The Democrat Party with, what's her name? The abortion woman there, I can't remember her name right now, who was part of the abortion clinics, not Sandler. She's a famous woman anyways. She was a eugenicist. She wanted to, for black people to abort their babies. And many of these people like Hitler, for instance, and Stalin, they were all eugenicists in their own way. Margaret Sanger, that's right, Margaret Sanger. Thank you to several people for pointing that out. It's happened in the past. And I, too, find it hard to accept that it will happen in my lifetime. I find this stage really hard to get behind, that they actually are planning mass depopulation, even though Bill Gates, for decades, has said we need to massively depopulate the earth. Even though the Georgia Stones or something like this, I can't remember what it is, with its obscure origins, says they want to maintain, the elite want to maintain or should maintain the population of the earth at 500 million people, which I think is very, very low. But in any case, the sentiment has been with us forever. The will to slaughter massive, massive amounts of people has been with humanity forever, since the beginning. That will is still there amongst us. And the people amongst us with that will are megalomaniacal. They seek power, and there's no limit of power that will satisfy them. Those are the kinds of people who entertain mass depopulation ideas. They're in power today. The leftists, the Democrats are of that mind. They've always been of that mind. The mindset of a leftist is that their ideological world will usher in a utopia. All we need to do is kill 90% of the people on Earth. And they feel they are so ideologically committed, like Brett Weinstein, to their leftist utopianism that they will close their eyes to all evidence of its evil. And they will accept that, well, to get to our utopian leftist world, we have to kill 90% of the people on Earth. There are people on our planet with massive power, enormous power, the power to do it. They have the will to do it. People get to that regions of power often only because they have that level of brutal, obsessive will, and no restrictions, no self-built restrictions about hurting other people or killing other people. So that exists. It's in the human psyche. It's always been in the human psyche, and it always will be in the human psyche. Let's read on. But I will take you through this, Patrick, he's speaking to the interviewer, because I am qualified to comment. I don't know what Vanden Bosch is about. There was no possibility at all, based on all of the variants that are in the public domain, 4,000 or so of them. None of them are going to escape immunity, i.e. become more dangerous. Nevertheless, politicians and health advisors to loads of governments are saying that they are. They are lying. They absolutely are lying. Well, why would you do that? Power. Folks, does anybody really believe that those politicians in power, especially the lefties, are not going to lie to you? And when they do lie to you, there's a reason for it. Here's the scary part, he says. Global medicines regulators like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the Japanese Medicines Agency, the European Medicines Agency have gotten together and announced, since top-up vaccines will be considered so similar to the ones that we have already approved for emergency use authorization, meaning that they have too not been tested, we are not going to require drug companies to perform any clinical safety studies. So, they authorize these vaccines to be used for emergency use, meaning very limited testing on them. And then because they are previously approved, none of the subsequent vaccines will require any testing at all. So the agencies responsible for protecting your health are going to look the other way every time these companies pop out a new top-up vaccine. They have carte blanche to jab you in the arm with any genetic material they choose. There you go. No studies required. For a top-up vaccine, that required almost no studies itself. How did we get here? From a vaccine which has a 99-point-something% survival rate, even higher amongst the young crowd, an almost 100% survival rate. These are very important questions, and the answers do not point in a very soothing direction, folks. If ever there was a time to be suspicious of those in power, this is it. And since, reading from the top, I can't think of a benign explanation for any of the steps, variants, top-up vaccines, no regulatory studies, it's not only that I cannot think of a benign explanation, the steps described and the scenario described and the necessary sort of resolution to this false problem is going to allow what I just described, unknown, unnecessary gene sequences injected into the arms of potentially billions of people for no reason. I'm very worried. That pathway will be used for mass depopulation because I can't think of any benign explanation. That is the final step of all of this analysis, that even with all research that I've done, the reading that I've done, and the presentations we've made and the videos I listened to from other people, I still find that hard to accept. But I can't find any reasonable argument against it. We've seen these examples in the past. We've seen totalitarian regimes massively kill their own citizens, sometimes frighteningly fast, faster than anybody can even respond to. Nobody predicts it in advance. Nobody wants to accept that it's a possibility. And those warning, there was I forget country in Africa where a general from Canada, he stayed behind when all the UN troops pulled out, even after being warned that the one group was going to slaughter the other. They all pulled out anyways. And what happened? One group slaughtered the other. I can't remember the name of it. There was a movie made of it. If somebody remembers it, put it in the comments, please. Rwanda, I think, was it. The Rwanda thing. And I can't remember the name of the general, but he wrote a book and they made a movie about the incident. Dallaire is the general, yes. That is right. Okay, we'll get just about at the end here. The most different variant, I'm going to go over a couple of the reasons why he says that this idea of the variants needing a new vaccine is absurd. It is absolutely absurd. You can read his entire explanation in the article, but I'm going to cover just a couple of points here of that, because he explains it quite well. The most different variant is only 0.3% different from the original sequence as emailed out of Wuhan in January 2020. 0.3% is the one variant that is the most different on the planet so far. There's one that's 0.3%. And now another way of saying it is that all of the variants are not less than 99.7% identical to each other. Now you might be thinking, 0.3%, is that enough to escape immunity and become more dangerous? The answer is no. Get away, get out of here kind of no. And this is an immunologist. This is a guy who is the top of his field at one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world. So I would say he's right. But let's, I guess I didn't copy out any more of his description, but he does go into some detail as to why the answer is such a resounding no, and he's right in that. And if you want to know the details, do read this article. He explains it in a very concise way. So let's read from the top. They're lying about variants. And then, of course, since the variants are not really different, you do not need a top-up vaccine. Now you should be getting the hairs on the back of your neck up, because they are making them right now. They are making billions of vials of it, and they will be available by the end of next year. Now, he goes into some detail. Okay, so let's read on here before. I don't remember which parts I screen capped and not. And I think they'll require people to first be on the vaccine passport, one world database. Yeah, that is the point of the whole exercise from the beginning, is to create this entire world vaccine passport, without which you cannot really survive in modern world. And then it will roll up into the top-ups. And if it takes a bit longer, it will take a bit longer. But this is not going away. It won't go away until enough people, if they ever do, say, you're a bunch of frauds and we are taking our freedoms back, so you can just stop doing this. I don't see any indication that there is a sufficient number of people willing to stand up for their freedoms in the world today. If anything, the overwhelming majority of people that I run into, including, the majority of people I run into and talk to, they are on board saying, get the vaccine, put on your mask, do the safe thing, and then I'll be called a conspiracy theorist for saying, don't let your freedoms slip away. They were the hardest won things in the world, and now you're giving it up. So why is my government lying to me? Because they're going to kill you. They're going to kill you, your children, your family. Read onwards. I know it sounds terribly conspiracy-oriented, but so did, if somebody warned that Hitler was going to kill millions and millions of Jews, people would have said, oh, geez, nobody's going to do that. You're a fear-monger and a conspiracy theorist. Same with Stalin, same with Mao, same with today, right now. Let's read on. The eugenicists have got hold of the levers of power, and this is a really artful way of getting you to line up and receive some unspecified thing that will damage you, like they told the Jews to line up and get on the train and be a good Jew, and we're going to take you to your new home. I have no idea what it will actually be, but it won't be a vaccine because you don't need one. And it won't kill you on the end of the needle because you would spot that. And this point here that the eugenicists have got hold of the levers of power is absolutely true. The eugenicists have always been on the left. And they've always been on the left because leftism is about a utopia. Eugenicism is about a utopia. The utopia where all people are beautiful, strong, and alike, and loving, and all the rest of this stuff, where everything falls, manna falls from the sky, all our needs are met, nobody suffers. But that's the dystopia. They are always on the left. The Democrats were eugenicists. The communists and the socialists, they're all utopians. They're birds of a feather. And they control the entire world today. That's why he says the eugenicists have grasped the levers of power all the way around the world, with Justin Trudeau as an example saying he admires China's dictatorship, and Biden in bed with the Chinese. The story is the same all around the world. Read on from the top with me here. It could be something that will produce normal pathology. It will be at various times between vaccination and the event. It will be plausibly deniable because there will be something else going on in the world at that time, in the context of which your demise or that of your children will look normal. They can put anything into any genetic material into those vaccine top-ups that they want. There will be no testing of them. They bypass all of that because they're so similar to the original, which was not well tested. This is the weirdest and weirdest of circumstances you could ever imagine. If you were going to write a dystopian science fiction movie, you could basically just write what's happening in the world today and it would fit that dystopian scientific megalomaniac tyrannical power takeover of the world. It would fit perfectly in place because that's what's happening. So, I think we're just about to the end of this. That's what I would do if I wanted to get rid of 90 or 95% of the world's population. And I think that's what they're doing. Now, I don't know for certain that they're going to use that system to kill you, but I can't think of a benign reason with that. And with that power, they certainly could harm you or control you. So you should object and strenuously oppose it. Yes, absolutely you should. Even if some of the details of this story is wrong. Even if some of the details are wrong, or it could be worse. We should defend our personal freedoms to the limit, to the death. Because that's what it ultimately means. Without your personal freedoms, your life is literally in their hands. Let's read from the top. And my concern is we are going to lose this because people will not deal with the possibility that anyone is so evil. I have the same problem accepting. And I'm not even saying I'm fully accepting all the details of this theory. But I can't find fault in the theory because we see this over and over again in history. Why would I think, and I don't, but why would anyone think that suddenly humanity has rid itself with tyrants seeking global power who are willing to kill the majority of their own people. Why would anyone believe that that element, that dimension of humanity is not with us anymore? It is. It's just very disconcerting to look that idea in the eye and deal with it. But that's exactly what we have to do. We have to look at that idea in the eye, because we're dealing with what looks like that coming to the surface for the umpteenth time in the history of humanity. It's coming to the surface again in the biggest way in history ever, right in our day and time. Let's read from the top. But I remind you of what happened in Russia in the 20s, or this is the second paragraph, the 20th century. What happened in 1933 to 1945? What happened in, Southeast Asia in some of the most awful times in the post-war era? And what happened in China with Mao, and so on, and so on, and so on. The examples are all over the place of tyrannical power mongers willing to kill off the majority of their own people. They're just better at it today, better at hiding it. And that is the end of the story. That is why your government is lying to you. Your government is lying to you because the powers that be want absolute power of the world, and they feel so close to it now they can taste it. They are phenomenally successful. They are leftists. They are the progressives. The reason why we have so little resistance to it is because everybody from childhood wants to think that the world is a safe and comfy place, and that we're going to be taken care of by those in power. Some of us grow out of that childish thinking. Brett Weinstein still, despite his personal experience, despite the evidence in front of his eyes of all of the leftist cities crumbling in destruction, burning, killing each other, because they want to cling to this utopian leftist idea. The first step to resolving this is facing the fact that progressivism, and they're clinging to some ideal world in which people's needs are all met by some powerful government of the world, which is ultimately what socialism means and what progressive leftists reach for, the transfer of power to those in government. They can't let go of that idea. The first step to preserving our freedoms and stopping this from going ahead is facing the fact that progressivism is the problem. The leftist idea of a utopian world for all of humanity is a dystopia. It's a carrot leading us into a literal hell with no personal freedoms and death for billions. So that's all I have to say for today. Again, not an uplifting message, but I'm not about uplifting. I'm about pursuit of the truth as I see it, and I freely admit that I could be wrong in some details. But I think in the large arc of this story, the large arc of humanity, this is about a struggle for power and control over the world, and the creation of a small elite class, and the preservation of a small elite class who rule over a large work-slave population. So folks, I hope you can join me again tomorrow, or the next time on Studio Burley for Coffee with Steve. And like I do at the end of every of these sessions, no matter how serious the topic, I still believe you should do something you love to do every single day. And if you don't have something you love, find something you love to do, because this is your life. No matter what's going on in the world, find something you love to do and do it every single day. And with that, thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Steve.